Hey everybody, my name's Rowanna. I am a nursing student from Sydney, Australia, and today I wanted to share with you some of my top tips for nursing clinical placements. I've made a bit of a list here, so I might just start referring to it looking down, but yeah, don't mind me, I'm just having a look through my list. For a little bit of background context, I've just finished my first year of nursing school and I'm doing a 2-year Masters of Nursing, which is pre-registration, but it is still a postgrad degree. So I have done a degree in psychology before, but it is a fast-track degree. So essentially it's kind of fitting in 3 years of nursing into 2 years. So it is pretty jam-packed, but yeah, halfway through at the moment, so very exciting. Anyway, I will now get straight into all of my tips. All right, my first tip is to make sure that you have the correct uniform. Most universities should have a set uniform that you have to wear, and I know for our uni at Sydney Uni, we definitely have a uniform that we all should be wearing, and there's lots of rules around it as well, especially with what hair you have to do, or just basically having it back and neat and tidy. Also, some of the different places that you'll be on for clinicals will have their own rules, so a lot of the times you'll have to have your hair in a bun. You can't have it in a ponytail, depending on which location you're at. Sometimes on certain clinicals you actually can't wear your uniform, you have to wear smart casual, so just make sure that you know what your uniform is supposed to be for that placement, and just double check online or on the clinical placement office with the clinical placement office, just so that you know exactly what you're supposed to be wearing. Something to make sure of as well is to have very comfortable shoes, and in my first clinical placement I had purchased some shoes that I thought would be really good, but ended up being really painful, and it really, by the end of the day, it really did hurt a lot, and it did make the first clinical placement I had quite annoying and frustrating, and it is something that I look back on and think I really wish I had some really good quality shoes. So I ended up going for a pair of shoes that I now really love. They're a lace up from the brand Echo, I can't remember how to say it, but I will put the link in the description for where I got them from, and I'll put a photo up as well so that you can see what they look like. But these are extremely comfortable, they're non-slip, they're full leather, all black, waterproof, exactly what you need. And I'm not saying you should go out and buy these, but definitely consider what shoes you actually want to wear while on clinical placements. Make sure that A, they fit the standard that you have to wear, and B, they're very comfortable. One of my top tips. All right, my next tip is actually to be punctual and arrive early. Too many times I've seen people arriving either right on time or a couple of minutes late, and a lot of places you can kind of get away with that. On clinical placements, it's a bit of a different story. Often on nursing clinicals, the first thing that you have to do when you get there, or the first thing that nurses do when they arrive on shift, is to get handover from the nurses that were on the previous shift. And if you're running late, it really, first of all, it doesn't look good while you're on clinicals. It just shows that you're not very good with time management, but also it means that you might miss out on the start of the handover, especially if they're doing a complete ward handover as well with everyone involved. Then you just miss out on half of that, and it's really important to make sure that you get there on time, even a few minutes beforehand, so that you're ready to go. If you have your handover sheet ready as well, ready to take notes, then it's first of all a really good look, but also it means that you're not missing anything as well. Okay, my next tip is to bring a notebook, and try and bring something that you can either fit into your pocket or something that you can carry around pretty easily. Not something that's too bulky or big, or something too important that if you got something spilt on it, you wouldn't worry too much. I like to bring a little pocket notebook that sits in, I have a little pouch, a nursing pouch that I wear at the same time when I'm on clinical placements, and that fits in there really nicely. And this is really helpful just to write down any notes that you've kind of thought of while you're on clinicals. If there's anything you've learned that you want to take note of, definitely write it down. If you are administering medications and it's a new medication, you've just learnt what it is and what it does, I try and write those down as well so that I can look back and kind of remember new things that I've been able to administer to patients. And it's really handy kind of going back and looking at all of the things that you were able to do and achieve, which is nice. Okay, my next tip is to ask questions. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention about this. And the first thing is that there are pretty much no stupid questions. It's really important to be asking things if you don't understand, because the worst thing you want to do is to start doing a procedure or administering a medication without understanding the complete steps or not understanding what the side effects might be of a medication, what it's for, things like that. You should definitely know what you're doing before you start doing it. Obviously, you're just learning, you don't know everything, I don't know everything. It can be really overwhelming in the first couple of weeks of clinicals. Even after a year of clinicals, I'm still confused about a whole bunch of stuff. So I try and ask as many questions as possible, and I try not to feel like I am a burden, because I would rather, and I think most nurses would rather, people ask questions than do something that they're not fully understanding of. So don't be afraid to ask questions from your nurses, your colleagues, your friends, or your facilitator, whoever's there that you can ask questions of. It's really important to be able to do so. Something else to consider is how you ask questions and when and where you do it as well. So while it's really important to be able to ask questions, asking them in the right way and also considering who's around you when you're asking questions is a really key thing. So if you wanted to ask, what does this medication do? How do I give it? How do I administer it? If it's an injection, for example, you don't want to be asking that in front of the patient or their family members, because they might get a bit fearful or scared that you have no idea what you're doing. And sometimes you might not know what you're doing, but you don't want your patient to be scared and worried and have a horrible experience around that either, especially if it is your first time. I remember my first IM injection. I was very, very nervous, but I had gone through all of the different techniques with my facilitator and my nurse, and I had practiced previously multiple different times, and so I knew that I knew how to do it, and when I was asking my questions with the nurse, I made sure to do it in an appropriate way. Also with that is to consider patient privacy when you're asking questions. You don't want to be asking very specific questions about a patient, identifying their name or what bed they're in or something like that, when you're surrounded by other people that may not be privy to any of that information. So other patients or other patients' family members, even other nurses that might not be involved in that patient's care. It's definitely not worth asking those sorts of questions when patient privacy is perhaps going to be breached. Okay, my next tip is to actually offer to help people before being asked to help. So often you'll be buddied with an RN or a nurse that's on the ward, and you kind of stick to them and you kind of do what they're doing. But sometimes they may have a lull in some of the things that they have to do, some of the tasks, or they might just be writing notes. And sometimes you might see that someone else is really struggling, one of the other nurses that maybe doesn't have a student with them. They've got a lot of things to do and they just aren't being able to get it done as efficiently, or they might look a little bit stressed. If you do see someone that's struggling a little bit, offer to help them. I think it's really important as students, when you don't necessarily have a hugely overloaded schedule. So you do often have the time to help out in some of the tiniest bits and pieces. I remember one of the nurses that I had worked alongside with but wasn't rostered on with that day. I could see she was really struggling to kind of get all of the morning tasks done. So I said, is there anything I can help you with? And I ended up helping to feed some of the patients that were not able to feed themselves. So I got that ticked off for her, and it is something that quite a lot of students will be able to help with. So definitely keep in mind that if you see someone struggling, even if it's one of your other students that are there with you, one of your friends or your classmates, if they're struggling as well, offer to help and see if there's any way that you can give them some guidance or kind of help out with anything that they need. A lot of people worry that students aren't going to be helpful, and I can understand that can be the case in lots of situations, but students can definitely be very valuable assets when they step forward and can do lots of helpful things for nurses when they're a bit time constrained. Okay, my next tip is to not work when you're on clinical placements, and that means working outside of study. So I work as a receptionist at the same time that I study, but when I'm on clinical placements, I choose to not work at all. Essentially, you're working a complete week while on clinical placements, and you're not getting paid for it, which is great. But you do need to consider the fact that you're pretty much working a 40-hour week, and to be adding on extra hours outside of that time is it's not really worth it. you're going to get burnt out. You're not going to be learning as much as you could be when you're on placements. And that's the whole point of being on placement, is to take advantage of the fact that you are there to learn. So if you can, I would try and avoid working within those weeks that you have placement. I know it can be hard for some people, especially if you have bills to pay. At the start of the year, I'd really encourage you to try and figure out how you're going to do it financially. If you can save up a little bit of money, or however much you need to get through those couple of weeks that you have placement where you might not be able to work, then I think that's a good idea. And that's what I've tried to do in the past as well, just to kind of give yourself a little bit of extra time during placements to really rest and recover afterwards. Because if you are working 8 hours on a shift in the morning, you finish at 3 o'clock, and then you have to go to your job by 4 o'clock, and you're there for an extra 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever it is, it can be extremely stressful. And I really don't think it's worth it if you have to do that multiple times during your placement. That kind of leads on to my next tip, which is to make sure that you give yourself enough time to rest and recover after your clinical placement days. And for me, I try and not have anything else scheduled in on the day that I have a placement. So I just go to placement, I try and get home, relax a little bit, have dinner, and then have an early night because I have to get up and do it all again the next day. That being said, there were a couple of clinical placements that I had in the past year that were just before exams. So I did have to study while I was on placement, which is very, very hard. And I get that, like, you might have other commitments that you have to be at, which you can't put off, which is understandable. And especially if you have exams coming up, it can be very stressful thinking that you need to study, but sometimes you just can't fit it all in. So what I learned to do was try and get as much of the study completed that I needed to complete before I went on placement. So if I had a week before my placement started leading up to exams as well, I would try and get as much study done then, so that I didn't feel so guilty going into clinical placements and feeling like I just didn't have enough time to get the study done that I needed to do. Also trusting in the fact that I have been to every lecture and I have done all of the work that I needed to do during the actual term or the semester, knowing that I've been to all those classes and like I have all of that information in my brain somewhere. It's just being able to recall it and practice recalling that. So that's kind of the way that I try and calm myself down if I do have exams coming up while on clinical placements. But if you don't, definitely take it easy. Get home, relax, have a good dinner, have an early night, get enough sleep. I think it's really important to be able to recharge and rest while you're on clinical placements, because it can be a bit stressful, and also you're on your feet all day, and it can get a bit crazy sometimes. What's next? Oh, okay. My next one is to take advantage of breaks. So you do get breaks while you're on placements. Quite often you get the same breaks that the other nurses do, whichever ward you're on. Sometimes that can be like a short morning tea break or a 15-minute, 20-minute break for like a snack or something like that. And then you also get a lunch break, maybe that's half an hour or something. But you do get breaks, depending on where you are, it'll be different, but you will have a break somewhere. And what I'd really encourage you to do is actually take those breaks when you can. And it's really important not to work through them. You need to keep recharging yourself. You need to make sure that you are both physically and mentally prepared to be able to continue through all of the shifts for that week and for that placement. So definitely take advantage of the breaks that you're given. Go and eat something, take a little walk, do a meditation, I don't know, have a bit of a rest and just recharge in the middle of the shift so that you can keep learning and can keep doing all of the things that you're there to do. Alongside that, I would definitely suggest bringing snacks. If you aren't making your own meals for lunches and things like that, I mean, often there's like a cafeteria that you can go and get food from, but I would definitely suggest bringing some sort of snacks along so that if you do get a little bit hangry in the middle of the shift, you can quickly just take a 5-minute toilet break or something like that. Quickly grab a muesli bar or a piece of fruit or something from your bag, and then just start to recharge and refuel yourself. Try and reset for the 5-minute break that you might have. Just say that you're going to the bathroom and then get back into it, and you'll 100% feel much better. I know that I have had those experiences in the past. So I did bring quite a few snacks along to most of my placements, and I did find that they were very, very helpful. I'm glad that I had them in my bag just in case, because there were definitely times where I was getting very hangry. So yeah. Okay, My next one is to know what hours you're working. A lot of the clinical placements will have different hours. You do have a set number of hours that you are supposed to be doing per week, and your facilitator will go through that with you. But just know what your start times are, what your finish times will be, and make sure that you're prompt and you're on time. But for example, there were some days on some of my placements where my nurse started at different times, so I was supposed to be there at different times on some of the days. So keep that in mind if that's something that you need to consider. And then just make sure that you have your schedule worked out and how you're going to get there and things like that, and make sure that you know exactly what time you have to be there and how many hours you have to complete as well, so that your facilitator can sign you off. All right, moving on to some of my last tips. One of the last ones is to make sure that you're interested and engaged on placement. I have seen this before, and it's not something that I've seen very often, but I have seen it before, and I know that I've heard stories from other people about people doing this. Sometimes students may turn up and you can tell that they don't want to be there, and they might not be enjoying that placement, and maybe they have their heart set on doing nursing in a particular location like pediatrics or surgery, and they're stuck in like a ward setting or in a GP clinic or something like that. And even if it's not something that you have your heart set on or an area of nursing that you want to go into, I think it's still really important to actively participate, show that you're engaged, show that you're interested, because all of those clinical skills that you're learning, even if it's not in an area that you enjoy, it's really important to learn any of those clinical skills that you might be learning on that particular placement, because it can be transferable across so many different areas of nursing and life as well. And also it can be quite disrespectful when you come in on a clinical placement, your RN has been placed with you, and suddenly they're exposed to someone who doesn't want to be there and is a bit grumpy and kind of just doesn't want to take any information in, doesn't want to learn. So it can be disheartening for some of those nurses. And also it might mean that for future placements that they may have for future students that come in and are paired with them, they may not want to be teaching them, and they may be disengaged themselves because they've had past experiences where students just didn't want to learn. So it kind of puts everyone at a disadvantage in the future anyway. So I would highly suggest actively being interested and engaged on all of your placements, no matter what situation you're placed in. And I get sometimes you might have other things going on in your life, or something might happen while on placement. It kind of puts you down a little bit. But definitely try and, again, reset, take a 5-10 minute break if you need it. No one really cares if you go for a little break to go to the bathroom. Just say where you're going. Just say, I'm just going to pop to the bathroom, I'll be back in a minute. Reset yourself, have a breather, and then when you come back, try and really switch on and put that nursing face on and act like you're interested and act like you are being engaged and respectful. And often you'll start feeling like that anyway, and you'll start enjoying the placement that you're on, even if you started out just pretending that you were. So I think that's a good tip for everyone that is going on a clinical placement, to make sure that you're interested and engaged. Okay, finally, my last tip is to step out of your comfort zone. There have been multiple times on clinical placements that I have felt out of my depth. The first time I had to do a bed bath for a patient, the first time that I had to give an injection. Oh my gosh, there's so many different times that I felt out of my depth, and I felt like I wasn't qualified enough to be there. I had no idea what I was doing. The first time I went into surgery, it was just an amazing, surreal experience, and I felt like a bit of an imposter syndrome. But that's the whole point of clinical placements. You are out of your comfort zone. You have never really been in those situations before, and that's what you're there to do. You're there to learn. You're there to step out of your comfort zone. You're there to take it all in and try and figure out what you like, what you enjoy, what you don't like. And that's the whole experience, is to try and learn all of these new skills and, again, be actively engaged in everything. So that would be my last tip, is to make sure that you are stepping out of your comfort zone. Something that I would recommend to kind of do this would be to put your hand up to attempt to do things. So for example, my first dressing change, I was really worried that I wouldn't get to do it. A lot of the times in the ward that I was on for this particular placement that I'm thinking of, we didn't get asked to do things often, to do a dressing or to do a bladder scan or something. We would have to put our hand up and say, hey, can I do one? Or can I do the next one? Can I watch you do one first and then I'll do the next one? And it's about kind of putting your hand up and taking your own initiative when it comes to your own learning. That's something I would highly suggest. Is if there is something that you are a bit scared of, but you know that you really should get a chance to do it and there's not going to be many opportunities, just put your hand up and say, I'm really nervous about doing it, but I think I really need to try. Put your hand up and say, this is my first time doing it, or I haven't done many of these, but I really want to learn and try. So for the next one, do you mind if I have a go? And just ask for help. And yeah, again, step out of your comfort zone. All right, those are all of my tips for nursing clinical placements. There are probably some more I could think of, but I haven't written them down on my list, and maybe I'll do another video another time with some more specific clinical placement tips. If you have any of your own and you wanted to share, then leave a comment down below so that we can all see some of the tips for clinicals. And if you have any questions, definitely leave me a comment down below and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. And if you want to see more from me and my channel, then click the subscribe button down below, click the notification bell so you're notified whenever I upload my videos, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!